as a company, we've been fortunate to see massive growth. We now serve over 6 billion recommendations every day. Comscore says we're the second to Google company that reaches Americans in America. The average American, 86% of them sees Taboola 30 times a month. And all of this data really, we're seeing the web changing, I think, for real this time. The pipes are changing, including mobile. And when I say pipes, I mean the web used to be one that was driven by search. And now it's driven by Facebook. We used to, have people to click on a text ad at some point so we can make money. Now we want them to, in real time, decide if they should read a native article, go to an oversold area to watch videos, see sponsorships on my site, or click on a text ad. And mobile is huge. As a company, for us, we're touching 50-50 from a revenue perspective, not from traffic perspective. So we're seeing revenue becoming more and more important to our publisher partners as well as the advertisers. And from our perspective, we see less app traffic. I think a lot of the app traffic that's being reported is in games. Actually, publisher, as the content creators that out there see more mobile, I think mobile traffic mainly coming from Facebook and social companies, and that's less app, more mobile site.
The whole idea of native advertising, we talked about, you've had some pretty interesting milestones in regards to kind of surefire affirmations that it's real and it's meaningful, right? Whether it's the size of the IO or whatever, you've had some pretty interesting milestones with clients. Native advertising feels like what we've said programmatic is and engagement, all that stuff. Like everybody has a different meaning from it. I think you did a great job of defining it. But from a brand perspective, in the media mix and the funnel, where does native advertising fall, right? Is it a brand play? Is it a performance play? How are they looking at it? So,
this is also an exciting point because I think for the first time we're seeing advertisers spending more than $10 million a year with us. And that's the first time it happened last year. And I think the reason is that...
That brings you a seat at the big boy table.
I hope.
Yeah.
Not big enough.
No.
But I think that, the reason is that, brands and publishers and performance marketers can, for the first time, use storytelling to touch the entire purchase funnel. So they can send someone to a YouTube channel to get them aware of a new product, and then they can send them to an article that compares product to consider something, and then they send them to something that has a button, buy this, or sign up to convert, and then they even send them to forums to keep them loyal. So for the first time, from a brand perspective, they can attack the full purchase funnel, they can measure that, and I think there's scale out there to spend real money. So I think it reaches the entire funnel, native advertising, top to bottom, and I think it only gets interesting if someone is measuring something and can attach an ROI to it so they can spend a lot against it.
So if we talk about, let's talk about specifically content, native advertising when it comes to video or editorial content, not search, because in your description and definition, you use search. That's what you led with, actually. So when we talk about content discovery and specifically branded content discovery, how does this all play out? Because so much discovery is occurring specifically on Facebook, right? And on social and on Twitter in general, right? Like one of the stats I heard with when I was working with one of my newspaper clients, and this was a couple years ago, but something like 60% of under 30-year-olds actually have not looked at a news site to get their news. They rely 100% on social feeds. What's the long tail there? The eventuality if social platforms are not only about sharing, but about they become sort of this hub and spoke model of the source of all the aggregated content. How does that affect the concentric circles of business models like native advertising?
It's a great point. So I think social is definitely real, and it's big. It's sending a lot of traffic to a lot of publishers out there, way more than search, more often than not, and that's a big deal. I'm very scared about it because I think that today Facebook, we share stuff on Facebook, and today Facebook shares it back with the publisher. They send traffic back to the publisher. But what happens if Facebook stops sharing? What happens if I give Facebook a story that I saw in the New York Times, and they suddenly decide that they want me to read the story on Facebook and not on the New York Times? And I think that day is a very scary day. So my hope
Are you suggesting that's an eventuality? You think it is?
I think it's a very scary day, and I think that's something that people are considering. And the more Facebook become, and companies like Facebook become, centric in the way we consume content as a router, what happens if they stop route back? So I think it's our responsibility as an industry to help publishers and advertisers to own distribution in a non-dependent way. So I think where it's going is that social companies are very important. They're sending traffic now all over the web. And I think from the publisher perspective, we have to think about strategies that we can contain that.
Well, I mean, this is an interesting sort of differing sort of almost 180-degree turn of the business challenge, right? Because we've been saying for a long time that brands as storytellers and relevance and the quality of the content and how they, relate to an audience is paramount and their focus.
Right.
And go to where your audience is. That's what good media activation is. But if you then add that layer of challenge on that, you also have to get really good at not just creating content that is compelling, but creating a destination that is compelling enough that if you hold the content into a gated garden only there, that people will come to it. I mean, how do brands manage that challenge?
So I'm convinced that the future victors of this industry are people that are half creative and half distribution. So you have to be the best at creating amazing stories that cater to people that should care about what you just wrote about or you want to sell. And the other half of your brain is, how do I own distribution? How do I get distribution? I don't really care if it's on your site, if it's on YouTube, or if it's embedded on a website. But if you're not spending half your time thinking about how do I get people to where I need them to be, and I'm dependent on hope as a strategy that Facebook will continue to fuel traffic into my properties, I think you're putting a big risk on your business.
And what role do agencies play in that? What role does like media and content, where do they play in that?
Both. We're seeing, we're working a lot with traditional agencies, new generation of agencies that are, are of this age of native advertising and are thinking about distribution. So how can they work with brands to think about distribution? Look at Netflix, look at American Express with Open Forum. I mean, these guys are super sophisticated working with their agencies about go-to-market strategy around content and distribution, and that's different these days.
I mean, so you're in the role of a CMO, right? And if you look at your budget right now at a point in time, what percentage of it do you allocate to pure play paid media versus how much of it do you allocate to drawing an audience to a destination where your content exists? Like in the food chain, what do you think it has more? And and from a measurement perspective, I don't really care about brand lift or anything. I just think from value, from the perception of the hearts and minds of consumers and audiences. What do you think is more impactful in the long term for a brand?
Whatever drives ROI to you. We see now brands, major drink companies that work with us to drive people to a third-party page because they notice that if people read that article, they tend to tweet something or buy something 30 days after. Others are saying, for us, it's all about driving into a credible source, such as maybe our social channels, and others are building sites, and they're becoming publishers, destination sites. The only thing that matters that I think differentiates successful brands from not successful brands are those that can spend money on all of these things, A/B test different experiences, personalization, discovery, social, mobile, all of that, and then attach some sort of KPI to success rate, some sort of ROI. Those that have done that are able to spend tens of millions of dollars, and those that are not are still stuck at marketing budgets. They're testing. And I think that's the main differentiation is what do I measure? We talked a lot today about data. So I think that's the key cultural change brands have to go through, which is I'm spending money, what do I want to get in return? Who is BS and who is real? And double down on real.
What role do publishers play in helping brands get there, right? If you talk about, defining, so one of the things I heard in what you said is that brands are positioned to be more successful if they have a greater sense of specificity around what their desired outcome or their KPI is, their measure of success, right? I mean, in order to effectively measure that and determine that, but also it seems like to define that, the publisher has to play an active role in that.
Right. Do
you feel as though publishers are at a place where they understand their own audiences well enough right now that they can be party to that?
No, I think it's not yet there. We invest a ton in data. The DMP industry is growing super fast. I think publishers play an important role in that. My fiancé works for the Wall Street Journal in the team that works with brands for writing stories for the Wall Street Journal in a way that's credible and can help brands achieve their goals. That job was not there 2 years ago. So I think you see major publishers invest. The Atlantic has a co-company, sister company that's working with brands. Time Inc. is doing that. So, we've all read the Netflix article on New York Times. It was beautiful. So I think a lot of publishers understand there's a lot of money in that, in storytelling. And if you do it right, whether yourself or partnering with an agency or someone to help you do it, I think you can gain a big part of the budgets of native advertising. And that's, I think, where it's going.
So is the eventuality that the line between advertorial and editorial, which has sort of been, from a journalistic perspective, has been very much so church and state, is that wall shorter and shorter? Is there more gray matter? Like, how is that morphing over time?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be a policy and guideline, and we should follow those guidelines. I think that there should be a bridge between the church and state that allows them to understand the value of each other. Editors and writers should know the power of content, and they should get feedback back, data, what happened about my story, how many people tweeted it, came back to the site, how much revenue per article you generate. So that's not a commercial discussion. That should be an editorial discussion too, because you're part of the ecosystem now.
Well, but I think there are, if we use the phrase, which I haven't heard in a long time, right, like digital natives. If you talk about publications that are digital only, came up, were born and bred digital, whether it's Mashable or whatever, like these publications. But even if we look at those that are pure technology publications like Wired or Fast Company, I mean, I got to tell you, if they're digital centric publications rather than sort of timeless brands like the Times or the Post, et cetera, the line between advertorial and editorial is pretty, the water's a little bit murky in between there, right? So I guess what I'm wondering is the idea of brands as publishers, like how far are those publishers going to let those brands into their business? Like at what point is there sort of, does it become arm's length, right? Co-creation is a really sexy word, but if fundamentally you're co-creating some of your content as a publication or a publisher, it's almost like, you're outsourcing some of your development. Like how do you manage that balance?
I actually think it's, I don't think ads are bad. They're bad if they're bad. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, all we should care about is value to consumers, right? So like we allow as a company when we recommend, we index 5 million sponsored articles today. So the likelihood we'll offer you something that you don't like. Let's say we offered you Kim Kardashian and you're not into Kim. So we allow you to exit out. And if you exit out, you'll never see Kim again on the web as long as we're there.
Right.
So I think there's, again, I think it's bad if it's bad. So if you get experience that you don't like, you feel cheated, you feel it was deceptive, then it's bad. But but the article in the New York Times about Netflix was fantastic. I read it twice.
Yeah.
So to me, I think it's all about how much you invest in value for consumers, how much you allow them to tell you if it sucks, and how much you're open for discussion. And if you are and you give people a choice, I think you have a long-term dividend on the success of that business.
Okay.